you mentioned Ireland, you mentioned Italy, you mentioned Finland. Why do you think those particular countries are sort of moving ahead with micro-credentials? What are the driving forces, do you think, that are pushing that forward?
Yeah, so I speak a lot about the drivers because I think the drivers help us also try to figure out what the definition is and then what the end game might be. And it's a bit of a slogan, but I frequently say that micro-credentials should be in the service of big ideas. They are not the big idea themselves. And I'm even critical of my own organisation in some respects because we've just established a new position with a responsibility for micro-credentials. I've seen this happen in Australia. There are a number of universities, leading universities, with that focus. The reason I'm critical is, should we be focusing on micro-credentials or should we be focusing on lifelong learning being the outcome, or should it be employability or other things? So one of the challenges I think around micro-credentials is that there are different ends that people have in mind. Right now, because of COVID, and this is certainly my reading of what's happening in Australia, there is a focus on employability, upskilling, and influential agents or agencies like the World Economic Forum with claims that 50% of employees are going to need upskilling within the next 5 years are certainly influential. The changing nature of work cannot be underestimated. That is real. But I think there's a lot of myth and misinformation packaged with that. We have heard for probably about 30 years now. In fact, the original source for this claim that 65% of jobs won't exist in the future has not ever been found. That is just something that's become one of these truisms that's quoted, but the research shows that there's no evidence to support that. There are many jobs that haven't actually been lost. They've morphed, they've changed, but they haven't been completely lost. Now, I wouldn't say there aren't going to be jobs. And again, AI is real. So we have a number of different drivers, one being employability, another being in Europe, lifelong learning is actually a very important tradition. It's part of what it means to be Europe. The Scandinavian countries, hence I mentioned Finland, lead in this area. But there are other factors as well. And if we look at our education system, arguably, it's a product of the 19th century, certainly not the 20th century. And so the idea that we could somehow front load people by sending them off to kindergarten and play centres, and then they go off to school, they do their number of years, they acquire their various qualifications, and we can argue whether the way we measure and assess learners is still relevant. And then if they're lucky, they'll go off and do further education in a college, a university, a TAFE. And once they graduate from there, our idea that that's it, you've had your education for life. That was my experience. And I'm unusual because I came back as an adult, but that does not make sense. So put aside employability. If learning is life, and I repeat that, learning is life, if that's the ethos and the mindset we want to embrace, then of course we're going to want to have just enough, just in time, just in case opportunities to keep learning. So for me, this is about mindsets more than anything else.